Everyone, welcome to the session. Today we will be hearing from Cody Hackett, the Director of Continuing Electronic Resources and Licensing at the University of Arkansas. And he'll be talking about bridge building leadership, establishing and sustaining library teams for success. Please use the Q&A or chat function during the session to include your questions. And if you'd like to use the captioning, please click the show captions at the bottom of your Zoom screen. All right, Cody, thanks for being here. We're excited.
Yeah, thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? Are we good?
You bet.
Okay, great. So I'm delighted to be with all of you today, and it's been a great conference so far, and I really want to thank the organizers for putting together such a well-run event. And I also just want to share that this is going to be a different type of presentation for me. So usually I use a script and I just sort of try to read from it, but I was once told that NASIG audiences are the friendliest audiences on the conference circuit. So I'm going to test that today. I'm going to try to use a more extemporaneous style in an effort to improve my public speaking. So here we go. So this presentation sprung from my recent work building a unit and a department at two R1 universities. So at Kansas State University and the University of Arkansas, I work to establish library teams for success in electronic resources, managing the entire life cycle of acquisitions through licensing. And so this session is going to examine how to strategically build and evolve teams responsible for managing electronic resources and acquisitions. But I hope that there are things that all library workers can take away about just how to build successful teams. And I want to emphasize that while the examples will be related to e-resources, I think these principles can broadly apply across libraries. So we have three learning objectives. We're going to try to identify and apply strategies to establish and evolve library units through gap analysis, advocating for growth, and creating adaptable frameworks. We're going to think about how to develop and implement training programs to address staff skill gaps, enhance team rapport, and align individual competencies with a unified vision. And then we're going to talk about how do you transition from routine tasks to a more structured and strategic vision by adopting project-based workflows and the appropriate tools to improve transparency and increase responsiveness. So this session is going to include a blend of strategy and practical implementation. So to provide some context for the strategies we'll discuss, I'd like to share the two institutional environments where I've built electronic resource teams. So, but before we get into that, I do want to say that at times this presentation will be a comparison when it's warranted between the two universities, but it's not really about the comparison between the two. It's more about how do you build a team at universities where you have different contexts. So at Kansas State University, it's a land grant university. It has an enrollment of about 20,000. It's R1. The budget was relatively flat, and the ER position had been vacant for about 2 years, which means there was a lot of potential cleanup and projects to do. The unit was designed to fit within a department, and it was supposed to lead 1 to 2 staffers. At the University of Arkansas, they are a growing institution with 36,000 enrolled this year, which is a very fortunate position to be in. We have an increasing library budget, which is very fun for an electronic resource person. And this was an entirely new department in a new division, so it had expanded scope. When it was originally written, the department was going to have a staff of 3, and over time that has become 5. So I like to think about surveying the terrain. So if you're building a bridge, you want to know what the terrain is. And part of this is using your onboarding experience as discovery. And whether you're new in a position or you've been there a while, you can still think of onboarding, especially for creating a new team. So here's a good point where there's a good comparison. At Kansas State University, it was a very structured onboarding process. My first 2 weeks were entirely pre-planned. Before I took a leadership role in the department as a unit head, I took 30 hours of supervisory foundation training, and then we gradually brought people into the unit team over time. At the University of Arkansas, it was completely different. I had an immediate leadership role as a department head. I supervised 3 staff members from day one who had not worked together. Um, it was creating the department from scratch, and a lot of it was how do you develop workflows within a growing institution as a new department. But I think one commonality between these two, well, before I get to that, I do want to say I think both of these approaches can work. I think if you are a new manager, the slow but steady approach that onboarding that I took at K-State was very, very helpful. I think if you have a seasoned manager, they may be able to move a little faster and hit the ground running with the Arkansas approach. So I think both approaches can be valid approaches. I just think it depends on your own position and what you bring to the table. I think one commonality between both is that I really try to be very intentional about taking charge of my onboarding. So even though it was very structured at K-State, I wrote a goals for my first 60 days and my first 90 days, and those included things like familiarizing myself with the systems, um, analyzing what the team structure might be, talking to stakeholders, and I did this at both institutions, and it served me very well. I think the stakeholder engagement piece is hard to overstate. During my first 5 weeks, I talked to between 30 and 40 people at each institution. And what that does is that just sort of gets your face out there and lets people know that you're new here, you have a new department or a new unit, and you're really wanting to be a great colleague. So I think once you've sort of onboarded, the other thing that you need to do with the terrain is you really need to understand um, the landscape in both sort of a people-focused way and a systems-focused way. And the best way I've discovered how to do this is through gap analysis tools. So gap analysis tools help you identify the differences between your current state and your desired future state and where you want to go. So anywhere you want to go that there's not a clear path, that's a gap, and that becomes part of your analysis. So a few of the tools that I use in gap analysis is I mentioned that one piece stakeholder engagement. So really just reaching out to everyone who will take an appointment with you. Um, I did a collections audit at each institution just to really get an understanding of how they were managing their electronic resources and where there may be gaps. I think for a new department, it's very important to really think about workflow, and so beginning to map workflows. And that center picture there is one way that we did this. So we actually took butcher paper and we gathered people who would be in my department, but also in other departments, and we sort of said, when we buy a new database, what all needs to get done? Let's list out all this task, and then that allowed us to begin to see where handoffs were happening and where bottlenecks were happening and how we can improve those. And then I did a SWOT analysis. And so a SWOT is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And the really great thing about a SWOT analysis is that if you do it sort of longitudinally and you do one 1 year and then you do another one the next year, you can sort of see how your progress is happening. So one thing that I saw was I was really happy to see that a lot of our weaknesses in the next year became strengths. So we had a weakness in documentation in our culture, and so we really made a focus of 2024 documenting things. And so in 2025, when we did the SWOT, we were happy to say that was a strength of ours. So I found that once you use the gap analysis tools, utilizing project visualizations can be extremely powerful for new teams because they allow the team to see what the vision of the department or the unit might be and where we're headed. So it creates some momentum. And then if you use tools like Trello, which I used at K-State, I identified 40 to 60 projects organize those according to easy lifts, medium lifts, hard lifts, and then prioritize them. And what that allowed us to do is get some easy wins at the very beginning to build confidence in our skill sets. And also, if you have these tools here, it allows you to build credibility because if someone's asked, what are you doing? You can point to these because they're transparent and you can say, we're working on this plethora of projects. So I really found that Trello is a great tool to use. JIRA is even a little bit more powerful, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. So once you've surveyed the terrain, you really have to design your bridge. And that includes creating a framework that's going to give your team direction and purpose. And so creating a departmental identity provides legitimacy and it lets people have some comfort in knowing what their purpose is and that they have a shared purpose as a team. It also creates some structure for buy-in so that people understand what their role is. So one of the key things for me was I did not want this to be a top-down process. I wanted this to be a co-collaboration to build this mission and vision as a team. So early on in my tenure at each institution, we sat down and we developed a mission and vision statement, and that is that what we do statement on this slide. And we also posted this in like a conspicuous document area so that when people ask us, what do, we have a couple of paragraphs to really explain what value we're bringing to the organization. I think the other co-creative act that we did that was very, very helpful was defining our values as a team. So we initially set up teamwork and collaboration, continuous learning and development, and effective communication. And then I think our lodestar value is centering the user at the heart of everything that we do. So often, whenever you work in these sort of behind the scenes technical services roles, you can sort of forget about the end user journey, and that is forefront in everything that we do within our department. I want to mention that these are living documents, so we go back and we periodically update them as our values may change or our mission or vision may shift. The other thing that I think was really helpful early on was to really make sure that everyone's position was aligned with the work that we were going to be doing or that we were doing. So I found that we've often in libraries forget to update position descriptions and make sure that people's position matches the work that they're actually doing day to day. When I did this exercise with the team at the University of Arkansas, I immediately saw that one of our staffers was operating way above and beyond her current classification and compensation range. And so one of the early wins was I was able to make a case to our admin team about upgrading that position to make sure that she was fairly compensated for the work that she was bringing to our library. And we've been able to do that since with a couple of other positions. So a well-designed team structure isn't enough on its own. You need to establish legitimacy as a unit or department, and that involves building strategic partnerships across your institution. So for the purposes of this talk, we're going to talk about four different stakeholder groups and how I have worked to include them as part of our building a department or unit process. So I think one of the key things is your library leadership. You really have to have a good communication with your library leadership and make sure that the vision that you're trying to create for your unit or department is aligned with the strategic vision of the admin team in the library. Um, Early on, we were asked to complete a annual report, and we had only been a department for about 4 or 5 months, so I thought that was going to be a very hard task. It was a little bit challenging, but the cool thing about that was even in those 4 to 5 months, we were able to say that we had improved X number of systems and we were on the right track, and then we were going to continue down this track. So that really helped admin see our vision and buy into what we were trying to do. I think with campus partners, it's very important to be able to explain your work in a non-library lingo. And one of the things that I've been doing is trying to reach out beyond the library with campus groups. So to date, we have reached out to Walton College, which is our business college. And one of the things that we learned from those meetings was that they were buying a lot of electronic resources. We were buying a lot of electronic resources, but we weren't really talking together about what we were buying and if there were opportunities for cost savings or synergies there. So just opening that conversation and saying that, you're here and you're willing to be a partner is a great thing to do across different parts of campus. The other thing that we focused on was the vendor community. So, as a new department, we wanted to explain to vendors what our role was and how they could communicate with us. So, one of the challenges at the University of Arkansas was that vendor communication um, there wasn't a clear strategy around it. So we had 6 different shared email boxes, and then people were often just reaching out to vendors on their own. So you never knew where the information was going to be housed and how people were going to get in contact. So we immediately created one unified Outlook inbox where everything happens, and we don't use we don't use personal emails anymore. And then we also manage that inbox through a team. So anything that gets sent there can be picked up by team members and assigned and worked on. And then finally, and then this one is almost paramount, is library colleagues. So you really want to show your library colleagues that you're a team player, that you're making an impact. And so especially if you're carving out a new department, you need to really talk closely with them about clear service boundaries, and those are where a workflow exercise can really help to understand who does what. The other thing that can really help is just support documentation. So all the documentation that we create as a department or unit is available to everyone else in the library through our Confluence instance. And then finally, I think cross-departmental projects can be a great way of showing your willingness to be a good colleague and team player. And so I think the key takeaway here is that you really want to be able to tell your story to different types of audiences, and you need to be thinking about what those audiences might be and what story do you want to tell each one. So if you're trying to build a bridge, you have to have a build team. So we've talked about how to establish a department unit identity. So now let's examine how to assess and develop your team members as individuals with their unique work styles, professional aspirations, and everything that goes with being human. And then that's also going to shape the identity of your team. So for me, it was very helpful to think about this as process and as personal. So for process, at each institution, e-resources tends to happen on a spectrum of reactive versus proactive type of work. And there's always going to be some reactive work. But what I was finding at the University of Arkansas was that we were extremely reactive. So we would not contemplate a renewal until we received the invoice, which was often too late to cancel, and everything felt like it was a 5 alarm fire that we were trying to put out. Because of that, we really had given up doing any sort of maintenance work. And we're just focused on putting out fires. So my first year, I really wanted us to focus first on project work because I had all those projects that I had identified, and I wanted people to understand. We often say that we do project work in libraries, but we don't really do all the best practices around documenting those projects. So we often don't make a charter, and we don't find out who the stakeholders are. So we learned throughout that first year of 2024 how to really embrace project-based work. And as we became less reactive, it gave us also more bandwidth to really think about the maintenance work. So now everyone has a calendar, and it explains like if you're an e-resource specialist, every day you check these things, every week you do this, every month you do that, and then every year we have different tasks. So really the goal is to move from like just one-off tasks to becoming strategic about what you're doing and where you're trying to go. And I think the only way that you can really do that is to engage your team on a human level and be a compassionate uh, boss or supervisor for them. So I think one thing I do whenever onboarding anyone or having someone come to our unit is we talk about learning preferences, we talk about their communication styles, their career aspirations, their past experience. So I really want to know where they want to go in their journey as in library work so that I can best support that. The thing that I've found is meaningful goal setting. So SMART goals, smart, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time bound have been very helpful in helping give structure to some positions that didn't have as much structure before. So I would encourage you to really think about goal setting. So, having identified your team members' current skill levels and their work preferences, I think the next critical step is to develop a targeted strategy to support their growth. Um, the strategies need to be tailored to the specific situation. And so I think here's a good time to compare and contrast the work at K-State versus Arkansas because I learned some important lessons. So at K-State, what I found was that the two people who were in my unit were very capable library workers, but they did not have a lot of experience with electronic resources. And so I felt like we were in sort of a building foundational skills mindset. So what I did was I created a curriculum with 6 modules to walk them through things that I found helpful as an early ERL to learn about the life cycle and the work that we do. So the curriculum was the first part of this is trying to upskill them there. And then I became a really big fan of utilizing YouTube video tutorials. And if you haven't tried this, I really encourage you to do it. Over time, I've become much less precious about documentation. I really want documentation to be fast and to meet the need of whoever's reading it. And that's really my standards for documentation these days. And so a YouTube video, when I learned about people's learning preferences, they really gravitated to this. So I would just create quick ad hoc YouTube videos explaining procedures, projects, basically anything that needed training. And the cool thing about that is they can go back and rewatch it. They can rewatch it at different speeds. And then the really cool thing as a supervisor is you get to see really in-depth analytics. So you can see where people, how many people viewed it, when they tuned out. So that often tells you that there was something there that was hard or challenging. And so it's just been really, really good. And so over time at K-State, I developed around 60 videos for us to use. And one of the things as I was preparing for this presentation, I was delighted to see you can see usage. And then even after I left, there was still some usage. So that was really encouraging. So when I came to Arkansas, I was still sort of in that, oh, I need to upskill the team mindset. And that was until I actually met with the team and saw them work and realized they had a really large depth of expertise. And so what I found to be supportive there was we really just needed to start documenting things more. So I worked with the admin team, and this is about those stakeholders and making sure that you're aligned with the vision of the admin team. And I told them, you know, we need a place that we can easily put documentation and it can be transparent for people. And so we purchased Confluence and JIRA, and we created what we're calling the manual. And so anytime they do a procedure or anything that could remotely be construed as a procedure, we put it in the manual. They document it and it goes in the manual. We've created 170 pages thus far, and it's been viewed about 5,000 times. So it's been very, very helpful in being transparent about our work, legitimizing our department, and then also ensuring that processes are documented. The other thing that was really helpful for the team was supporting their growth through deeper skills acquisition. So we each pick a course that we're going to work on throughout the year. And so we've been able to get some people into ALA courses and other open educational resource courses that have been very, very helpful. So the key here is your training has to adapt to the current skill level of your team. So with a clear understanding of how to develop your team's skills based on their existing expertise, now let's explore some essential strategies that will enable them to maximize their effectiveness. So I think one thing that's common across libraries is that we often have lean staff. And I think when you have lean staff, you really have to think very thoughtfully about what you're trying to accomplish with the resources you have and what new tools you're lobbying for. So everywhere I go, I think about how to leverage automation. One key way of doing this was at K-State. We were not really using the community zone that much. We had less than 50% of our resources initially attached to the community zone, so we increased that to around 90% by the time I left. We also use auto holdings from vendors. So those are KBART files that are passed from your vendor that really help with the management of electronic resources. I think it's also very important to try to advocate for new tools if there's a budget. JIRA and Confluence, we've already talked about that, but that has been very, very helpful for us. But even small tools. So we purchased like a $30 VPN that allowed us to simulate off-campus access, and we found 70 issues at renewal doing this. And this was the first time this had been done at renewal, testing that off-campus access. And then I really think you need to think about how can you leverage your current resources. So for us, I mentioned that we reduced the Outlook footprint from 6 email boxes to 1. And in doing that, we also realized that there was a plugin for JIRA and Confluence. So now Outlook really just serves as sort of the starting point for our ticketing. So anytime we get a task in Outlook, we push it to JIRA, and then from JIRA, we assign it to a person so that there's accountability and that they can work on that task. We also use canned responses, and it's a team managed email box. And that's been something we've had to teach librarians in particular, that if you email our department, that you may get an email from a library worker who's not me. That's fine. They have expertise. They can handle it. And so that's been one of the things that we've had to train our colleagues on as well. So even with all the right tools, you still need to complete projects that can help build credibility and trust for your team. So if you're in a new position, I encourage you to try to find like a cross-departmental project that allows you to really make an impact early on, because that will just legitimize your team and show people that you're a good project manager and can be trusted. So at Kansas State University, we've talked about the community zone metadata. And what I noticed there is there was a practice of double cataloging because there was a mistrust of the community zone metadata, and it was a well-founded mistrust. Kansas State had migrated to Alma as very early, and if you were an early migrator, you often got burned on using the CZ. So people really didn't want to use it in ways that I had seen it be used as I came to Alma later on. So part of the challenge was really trying to figure out a way forward where we could utilize the CZ more. So we developed a systematic metadata quality assessment framework. So what this allowed us to do is to say, here's the CZ records, and they are of this metadata quality, and here's the records that we're bringing in from OCLC or the vendor, and they're of this quality, and they're kind of comparable, so maybe we can go with the CZ records. And this sort of so once we got past that with the double cataloging, it really opened up trust to allow us to talk with catalogers about, we're loading lots and lots of ebooks, is there a way that we can start using the CZ to reduce those loads so that you can spend your time on other things? And because they had seen the success in this first challenge here, they were more receptive to handing off CZ ebooks or ebooks to the CZ. So I think at the University of Arkansas, we had a similar opportunity to really show our worth very early on as a department. Um, Our financial system had grown unwieldy at 385 active funds with inconsistent naming conventions. We couldn't really use Alma Analytics because people just didn't know like what data it was pulling for the out-of-the-box reports, and it was just challenging to really pull a budget review in a timely manner. So we were asked to take a look at this, and I developed a new taxonomy of and naming conventions. We flattened the hierarchy to 80 funds, which really allowed us to enhance our fiscal transparency. We added some new reporting codes so that we could get a different feel of like what types of things we were buying and drill down in our data in different ways. And finally, we started building analytics dashboards to show this so that people could pull the information real time very quickly. So this was a big win for us. And this just sort of shows a little bit of what we did here. So this is a partial mapping of the previous structure. And then as you can see, there's a lot more logic and framework here. I think the key thing when you're doing a big cross-departmental project is really to over communicate and over explain. So we use that Confluence to create a hub which had everything related to this project. And we would, if we had questions about it, we would direct people to the various pages that they needed. But really, it was what this showed our admin team was that we were serious about our fiscal transparency. And so after this project, we became the Electronic Resources and Acquisitions Department. And so that's something that's going to happen. So as your team demonstrates success, you'll likely face scope expansion or scope creep or mission creep. And this is a challenge that requires thoughtful management, but it's not always a really bad thing. So as you demonstrate your value, you're gonna be asked to take on more responsibilities. And I think if when it starts to happen, you really need to question personal role scope creep. So how is my role changing from what I was hired to do? And then how is that changing the department as well? Because both of these can affect team performance because you can end up with mission drift. You can have requests that you do things that you don't have resources for. It blurs the boundaries of your department and other departments or units, which can cause problems. So mission creep is not bad. You just need to make sure that as you're evolving, that you're formalizing what's happening and you're making sure that you have the resources to support those changes. So for me, my role changed from electronic resources librarian to director of continuing electronic resources and licensing. And our department over time changed from the ER department to the ERA department to the continuing electronic resources acquisitions and licensing department. So throughout this bridge building process, you'll inevitably encounter resistance to change, and that requires some strategies to overcome that. You're going to be seen as a change agent, whether you are or whether you think of yourself that way or not. And so some of the resistance that you may see is we've always done it this way. There's a fear of change. There's territorial protection. And just as an example, at K-State, when we were shifting that local cataloging to the community zone, we triggered at various points all of these patterns in different staff. And it was just very important to communicate where we were going, let them know up front that there may be some turbulence that we're going to hit, but this is for the better in the long run, and sort of try to provide what your vision is. So you want to be transparent, have a rationale for what you're doing, and make sure you're really documenting it. The other things that have been very helpful when navigating this change is giving your staff a space to be psychologically safe so that they can vent about changes, whether you're there or not, and they can having regular check-ins to make sure that you're still in progress, that the team still has bought in to what you're trying to do. And then the other thing that I've done is really just dove into some of the theoretical frameworks, and there's a lot out there. So I'll just name two here. Cotter's 8-step model helps really shape change, and Lewin's model helps as well. So I think one thing that you need to do is once you build the bridge, how do you know if it's structurally sound and effectively serving its purpose? So I look at this in two different spectrums. So we want to assess the team strength, how strong is the team that we created, and then we want to assess the user journey and how have we improved that. So in the team strength, we have metrics like we had one library worker obtain an ALMA certification, so they deepened that expertise. We performed within our first year, our first cross-departmental knowledge transfer when we had cross-training with a science colleague. And so what that did was that showed them our processes and really opened the door to a larger conversation with our science team. We also were really transparent about our documentation, making sure everyone can see what we're doing and try to legitimize ourselves that way. And then I think it's hard to gauge this, but it's worth keeping an eye on, at least like a gut feeling of what is your small C culture like every day. And the small C culture is that culture at the team level, at the department level. Do people like coming into work? Do they talk to each other? What kind of small C culture are you trying to establish? And then how does that resonate with the big C culture, which is the culture coming top down from your library administration and from your campus? And then finally, I think it's worth pointing out, worth framing your work in terms of the user journey. So if you remember, I was talking about we put the heart of the patron is the heart of everything that we do. So everything that we do, we frame how did we improve the user experience through our work, and that could be processing time reductions, improving access point by removing access points, because often at Arkansas and K-State there were both migrations and there were a lot of access points that didn't work anymore that needed to be removed. Telling about your how you've increased response speed to access issues, and then show that value of that proactive maintenance that you're doing. So let's synthesize some of these insights into actionable takeaways that you can apply regardless of institutional context. So I like to see it as four pillars that all are supporting this bridge building leadership. Um, I think planning the bridge, we've talked a lot about through that gap analysis, establishing a clear identity, um, aligning your team structure with the institutional priorities, all of that documentation. I think one thing that gets overlooked is managing yourself. Change is hard, and managing change is really hard too. So you need to give yourself some grace and set personal boundaries, but also communicate your challenges with your supervisors and be open with your colleagues. So I work very closely with the other department heads slash directors, especially now that we're in sort of shaping what our role is in the library. And then when you're building that team, I think you really need to assess what skills they already have, and then how can you bring them further along, right? How can you invest in scalable training materials, whether that's open educational resources or something different? And then over time, you really just build that trust. You build the trust through communication, through your actions, and through consistency. And so I think the last pillar here is about ensuring longevity. I think you really need to be intentional about how you want your team to operate every day. So that small C culture. I think you need to give your team the right tools to succeed. So that's that JIRA, Confluence, whatever they need. You need to try to find a way to get them the tools, or at least something analogous to it. And then I think you need to have frank and honest conversations about their performance through qualitative assessment and quantitative assessment. And then finally, you have to celebrate successes. everything that you're doing, you're going to have a lot of milestones, and those are times to take a breath and celebrate what you've done. So I hope these bridge building strategies help you establish and evolve successful teams at your own institutions, and I welcome any questions that you have.
Great. Thanks so much, Cody. And I love the presentation style. I thought that the conversational went really well. So thanks for that. If anyone has questions, please place them in the Q&A or the chat. We have about 5 minutes left in the session. We have one that came in through the Q&A, and that is, how does accessibility factor into your workflow standardization?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and that's one that we've been wrestling with throughout this spring. So with the changes coming to Title II in 2026, we've actually been very fortunate at the University of Arkansas that our legal team has really been at the forefront of having us have accessible language in all of our licenses. So um, we're sort of ahead of the game on that. But in terms of VPAT testing and gathering that, that's a whole new thing that we're trying to do. And so that we're working for the first time with Campus IT, who actually we get VPATs and then we send them to Campus IT to be tested. And then depending on how that test goes, we can decide whether we're going to purchase something or not. I think one of the challenges right now is bandwidth. When you're the library, we're buying lots of things, so we could send them 200 VPATs, right? And that's too many for their team. So we're trying to figure out that balance of how do we ensure that we're compliant, but we also want accessibility to be real. We don't want to just be compliant. We want it to be user-centered and really work for people, and that's where that testing is a crucial component. So we're still working through that one, but it's a great question.
Thanks. In the chat, we have a question. Can you say more about psychological safety?
Yeah, I think yeah, I don't have like a good spiel for that. I think for me, what I'm trying to do there is I've worked in libraries where voicing your opinion was like not the thing that you were supposed to do, right? And so I think it's about being welcoming and sort of just trying to set up a small C culture where people feel like they can do that without like blowback. I think for me, I really separate the process versus everything else. So if you're criticizing the process, that's totally fine. Everyone can criticize the process as much as they want because that's going to get us a better process. I think when it starts getting into like personal things, that's where the psychological safety, you have to like come in and say like, no, we're getting into like personal disagreements here. And we're really wanting to enhance service levels in the process. So I think it's about separating out those two things.
Great. In the Q&A, someone has asked, could you share an example of your YouTube curriculum resources?
Yeah, so I actually created on the slides here, I actually made those. I didn't make them public, but I published them. So you have a link and you can see like 30 of the videos. And so it's just sort of a playlist. So if you go into the Sched, pull down the PowerPoint, it'll be there.
Okay, wonderful. Any other questions? We might have time for one more. Oh, we have one. Michelle is thanking you for an awesome presentation and is wondering what is the kitty's name.
That is Rosie, and she is a feisty tabby who is 6 years old. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I think that will wrap it up for this presentation. Our next session is in Zoom room 1, and that's our snapshot sessions. So this room will be empty for a little bit. If people want to go over and check out the snapshots, that'll be in about 15 minutes in Zoom room 1. So thanks so much, Cody,
Yeah.
and look forward to hearing more.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity and thanks for the great questions, everyone. NASIG's awesome. So thanks.